Before we start fracturing the building, let's set up our project and get things organized. So under my CGMA folder here, I just created a project for this shot called Project X. And we've got, Maya scene in there from the animator, and I like to make just a Houdini folder, and that's going to be my main Houdini job folder. And you can use your own conventions for what your directory structure looks like. Some things I'm just used to from different studios that I've worked at. Like I prefer to create an XFR folder, short for transfer, for files that have come from other departments or other programs. And in this case, I've created that XFR folder that holds the Alembic files and any other miscellaneous pieces of geometry that we might need. I've also created a render folder for my test renders. I tend to use an IMG folder for my flipbooks. The HIP folder is for my HIP files. The caches is for local caches that are only used within Houdini. Typically those are BGeo caches. And for caches deliver, that's where I've cached out things for the lighting department. In this case, we're caching them out as Alembic. And then finally, this backup folder is auto-created by Houdini. You could use the built-in Houdini project setup here. If you go to File and New Project, then this allows you to pick a location and it has a whole bunch of predefined directory structures for you here. But I don't really bother with most of these predefined directory structures. Most of them I don't really find myself needing or using, and those can kind of be created on the fly as you go. So it's up to you if you want to set things up with this. But one important thing to note, as they point out in this new project here, it says this job variable will be set to this project path / that project name there. And that job variable is very important. There are lots of caches that we're going to be generating throughout the class, and those will all be prefixed with job. So if you don't have that variable properly set in the scene, then it probably won't be able to find most of your caches and you'll run into problems. So whenever you're getting started in a new Houdini session, always go to File and then Set Recent Projects, and you can select your recent project from that list. If for some reason it doesn't show up in that list, then you can just go to Set Project. In this case, mine would be under Project X, and the Houdini folder is the project folder. So we'll hit Accept, and now we can be sure that that job variable is set correctly. You can see it down in the bottom of the Houdini UI if I bring that into view. Let me just click that one more time. You can see it's probably small in the screen grab, but it says job's been set to the correct location there. So now that that's set properly, let's start bringing in our assets. Let's just tab at our object context here and create a new geometry node. We'll just call this one asset monster. Asset underscore monster. Let's dive inside. And we're going to bring in these Alembic files with an Alembic node. So just tab and type in Alembic. And then in the file name here, you can go to your file browse. This job will already take us into our Houdini folder here. Then go to XFR, where we've stored the Alembic files for our scene. And you can find these Alembic files on the class assignment page. And in this case, we'll just grab this Dino MSC underscore 01 ABC file. That's the cache for our big monster. Now in my scene, I've already set the time range to the correct range, and this shot runs a bit longer in the original shot. In this class, we're only looking up through frame 1150, and we're starting at frame 985. So you can set the timeline correctly by clicking on this little icon in the bottom left, set the start to 985, end to 1150, and you can hit apply and close. Most of this stuff you don't have to worry about. Aside from that, the other interesting option that we'll probably take a look at later is this integer frame values option, which if we turn that off and set a step size, will allow us to check our subframes. But you don't have to worry about that for now. Just change your time range and close that. Now we'll be grabbing this geometry from other parts of our Houdini scene, of course, and I tend to like pointing to a null node instead of a geometry node directly. So if you just tab and create a null and connect that, we'll just call this out_monster. And then we'll refer to this out_monster null anytime that we need to grab this geometry. So now let's jump out of that monster section and create a new geometry node to import our environment. And I'll rename asset to assets just to stay consistent with my usual naming conventions. Create a new geometry called assets_environment. We'll dive inside there, create another Alembic node, hit the file browser, once again go to job, xfer, and we'll grab the most recent version of the destruction environment Alembic here. In this case, destruction building VO2. And you'll see this is importing our cityscape here. Now if we flip our display to show all objects, you can see that this round building here is the only one that we care about for this class, since we're just dealing up through 1150. If you extend the timeline to, let's see, I think it's 1325 and apply that, you'll see that the monster is going through another building as well, a little bit later in the shot. If we scrub ahead, then a bit later he hits this one as well. We're not going to worry about both buildings for this class, but if you find yourself with extra time, you can absolutely feel free to take the same lessons and apply them to the second building as well. But chances are you will have your hands full with just dealing with the one building for now. Now let's isolate this building so that we can work on this, and the path attribute is extremely important for our destruction workflow and often later in the pipeline as well. Now if you're familiar with a Maya hierarchy or a hierarchy in many programs, you'll see that that's represented in the path attribute of an Alembic file. So if we open up the spreadsheet on this Alembic geometry, you can see we have a number of buildings, and all of these slashes indicate different levels of the hierarchy of that geometry. Now this path attribute is often used perhaps by a lighting department to assign shaders or look dev, so we always want to make sure that we keep this information intact. And for now we're just going to use that to filter out the one building that we care about. So if we hit S to go to selection, make sure it's selecting primitives with this select groups or connected geometry turned on. Go to that gear icon, select Alembic paths, and we can just grab any piece of this geometry. In this case, I'm just clicking on that roof, and I'll tab in the viewport and type split. So that will drop in a split node that's sort of splitting out just the selected geo based on this group parameter. The split node is nice because the second output gives you whatever is not selected, so it's a really good way of organizing your scene. But we want to split out more than just this top layer here. So let's take a look at that path attribute and see if there's something that we can pull out of that to select the entire building instead of just one piece. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to see a big long string in a parameter like this. So if you click in that string parameter and hit Alt-E, that will bring up this string editor window, which you might find a little bit easier for editing, rather than working just in that parameter view there. So judging by the hierarchy in this path attribute, it looks like this building has a name we can use called Mid-Rise Jetsons. So let's delete before that replace it with an asterisk for a little wildcard and do the same thing after it. And let's apply that. And you can see, sure enough, that is selecting the entire building based on that substring. So once again, let's create some nulls so that we can grab this geometry elsewhere in our scene. I'll just create a null and call that out underscore destruction building A. And for the second output of that split, I'll just call this render untouched env. Let's connect those up. So we've got this nice little organization going on here. Now finally, let's jump out of that environment section and let's import our camera. Also, I'm going to just revert this timeline back to the range that we actually care about for this class, up through frame 1150. Close that again. And now cameras are a bit of a special case. So for a camera, we need to get it to actually build a Houdini camera based on the Alembic file. So let's create an Alembic archive this time, instead of just an Alembic. This one, we're not going to create a geometry node and drop it inside, although we probably could. We'll just directly at that object level, create that Alembic archive, and then select that, and we'll point that to our cam underscore render Alembic file and accept. Let's rename this camera. And then on the Alembic archive, there's this button to build or update hierarchy. So if you hit that, then it will actually build the contents in a hierarchy that matches the Alembic file. So in this particular case, that Alembic file only has a camera in it. So that's going to create the camera transform node and an underlying camera shape, which we can now select in our viewport here. So we've got our render camera matching our animation and environment assets. Now it looks like this camera aspect ratio isn't normal full HD aspect, and for this project I just want to do regular HD aspect ratio. So on that camera shape, if you go to the View tab, you can change the resolution to either 1280 by 720, or you could do 1080p if you'd like. We can always change this at render time as well. But it's very important that we have the right camera framing, because we're going to keep the actual framing of the camera in mind when we do all of our fracturing and other processing on our scene. You don't really want to waste work making things look nice that are just going to be off frame. So now that we have our project set up and our assets loaded and our timeline set and camera all sorted out, we're ready to start planning out the fracturing of our building asset.